Have you ever been told silently or out loud that you didn't belong somewhere you had every right to be? On Flight 882, two 10-year-old black twins boarded with valid first-class tickets, holding nothing more than their small backpacks and quiet excitement. Yet one passenger refused to sit near them, declaring they didn't deserve their seats. Imagine the sting of those words at that age. Imagine the silence of a cabin full of strangers until one choice changed everything. What would you do if you were the child? Would you shrink back and move, just to end the stares, or would you stay, knowing every second felt like a lifetime? And if you were there in that cabin, would you speak up, or would you let the moment pass? This story isn't just about a flight. It's about dignity, courage, and the surprising stand a pilot took that shook an entire airline. So, before we dive into what happened 30,000 feet above the ground, ask yourself, what would you have done? Stay with us, and if this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, so together we can keep these voices heard. The cabin lights in first class glowed a soft amber, a kind of calm before the rush of boarding. The flight attendants moved with steady rhythm, stowing coats, offering smiles, making sure each detail felt seamless. Outside the windows, rain brushed against the tarmac at JFK, blurring the city lights in the silver streaks. Among the early passengers were two children, twins, no taller than the seatbacks. Jordan Cole and his sister Naomi walked hand in hand, their steps half nervous, half excited. They carried small backpacks decorated with patches, and each wore a plastic pilot's pin the gate agent had given them, clipped proudly to their jackets. It was their very first time flying without their parents. The lead flight attendant, Grace Turner, bent down to their level with a gentle smile. "Right this way, sweethearts. Row 2, your seats are ready." The twins climbed into their plush seats, wide-eyed at the world of first class, the oversized windows, the little reading lights, the folded blankets waiting for them. Jordan pressed the seat control button and gasped when the chair moved. Naomi giggled and pulled her stuffed rabbit onto her lap. They had no idea that within minutes, their presence would ignite a storm. The moment arrived with the sound of heels clicking on the jet bridge. A woman swept in mid-60s, elegant, hair perfectly coiffed, pearls at her neck, Veronica Whitfield. Her perfume trailed behind her like a declaration. She held her boarding pass like a claim of ownership. Her eyes scanned the cabin, narrowed, then froze on row 2, on the twins. For a second, her face revealed nothing. Then came the frown, the inhale, the stiffness of a woman used to things her way. She walked to her seat, the one beside Naomi, and stopped abruptly, as if the very idea of sitting there were an insult. "No," she muttered, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Absolutely not." Grace Turner, still nearby, tilted her head. "Is something wrong with your seat?" Ma'am Veronica's voice rose. "I will not sit here, not next to them." She gestured, a sharp flick of her wrist toward the twins, who looked up in startled silence. A ripple passed through the cabin. Passengers shifted in their seats, pretending to look at phones but listening intently. A businessman in row 3 frowned. A young couple exchanged glances, but no one spoke. Jordan's hands tightened on the armrest. Naomi leaned closer to him, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight against her chest. Grace kept her tone even. "Ma'am, these are your assigned seats. The children have tickets. I don't care what they have." Veronica cut her off. "I paid for comfort, for peace and quiet, not to be stuck next to." She stopped short of finishing, but the meaning hung heavy in the air. Naomi's lips trembled. She whispered to her brother, though the whole row could hear, "Did we do something wrong?" Jordan shook his head, but his eyes darted nervously toward the woman. He was only 10, but in that moment, he felt the weight of something he couldn't name, something that said, "You don't belong here." Grace inhaled slowly. She had been a flight attendant for over 20 years. She had seen rudeness, arrogance, even hostility. But this directed at two children cut sharper. She glanced at the twins, then back at Veronica. "They have every right to sit here, ma'am. Their parents purchased these seats." Veronica's reply came like ice. "Not next to me. Move them." The cabin grew quieter still. The hum of the ventilation system seemed louder. The rain outside pattered harder against the fuselage. The twins' innocence collided with Veronica's venom in a way that made time stretch unbearably. Naomi's wide brown eyes darted around, searching for help. Jordan looked down at his shoes, his voice barely audible. "Why doesn't she want to sit with us?" That single question cracked something in Grace. She knelt beside them, lowering her voice but making sure Veronica could hear. "Sweethearts, you've done nothing wrong, nothing at all." But the moment was already alive, spreading like fire. A man in row 4 pulled out his phone. The soft click of recording mode. Another passenger whispered, "Unbelievable." And Veronica, sensing the stares but doubling down, raised her chin. "Either you move them, or I'll take this up with the captain. Let's see if he values loyalty over this nonsense." She smoothed her skirt, as if preparing for battle. The twins sat frozen, unsure if they should cry or stay strong. Their small bodies sank deeper into the oversized seats, trying to make themselves smaller, invisible, but nothing could erase the fact they were already seen. By everyone, and soon, by the world. The morning of the flight had begun with sunlight streaming into the coal brownstone in Brooklyn. The air carried the scent of coffee and toasted bagels, and the sound of children's voices echoed from the upstairs hallway. Dr. Nathaniel Cole sat at the dining table, reading the Wall Street Journal, but his eyes drifted more often to the stairs than to the columns of numbers and market predictions. He was a tall man with broad shoulders softened by years of calm discipline. His presence filling the room not by volume, but by gravity. His company, Cole Dynamics, had grown into a major player in fintech. Yet this morning he was just a father seeing his children off for their first solo trip. Dad Naomi's voice rang out before her feet hit the last step. She came rushing down with her stuffed rabbit already tucked in her arm like a travel companion. Her curls bounced as she announced proudly, "I pack my own bag this time." Her twin, Jordan, followed, slower, more deliberate, wearing his navy jacket zipped all the way up. He carried his backpack like a soldier prepared for duty, though the oversized straps made him look even smaller. Nathaniel folded his newspaper, leaned back, and let the sight of them wash over him. They were 10 years old, but already carried themselves with a confidence he hadn't known at that age. Elaine Cole entered from the kitchen with 2 travel mugs and a smile that softened everything. "Here," she said, sliding one toward Nathaniel. "Strong. You'll need it." She kissed the twins on their heads. "Eat something before you go. Bagels are on the counter." Jordan obeyed quietly, tearing a piece of bagel and chewing without much enthusiasm. Naomi, on the other hand, was too excited to sit still. She twirled near the table, her stuffed rabbit swinging. "We're really flying alone, right? No parents, just us?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Yes, darling," Elaine said gently. "It's only a 3-hour flight to Houston. Grandma will be waiting right at the gate. You'll do wonderfully." Nathaniel watched them with pride, but also with a weight pressing into his chest. He remembered his own first trip out of state as a boy, the glares in the bus station, the muttered comments from strangers who thought a black child in certain places didn't belong. The memory lived in him like a shadow, and he knew the world hadn't changed as much as people like to say. He set his coffee down and motioned for the twins to join him at the table. "Listen to me, both of you." His voice was calm, steady. "Today is special. You've earned this. You bought those tickets with your own frequent flyer miles. Remember?" Jordan nodded, a small smile breaking through. "From all the trips to see Grandma." "Exactly," Nathaniel said. "So remember this. You have every right to sit in those seats. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Naomi tilted her head. "But what if someone does?" The question stilled the room. Elaine glanced at her husband, sensing his hesitation. Nathaniel felt the knot tighten in his chest. He wanted to say, "That won't happen." He wanted to give them a bubble of safety. But lies, even gentle ones, had never been his way. He reached across the table, taking both their small hands into his. "If someone says something unkind, you hold your head high, you look them in the eye, and you remember what I'm telling you now. You belong anywhere your ticket takes you. And more than that, you belong anywhere your heart tells you to go." The twins grew quiet, absorbing his words with the seriousness only children on the brink of independence could show. Naomi finally whispered, "Okay, Dad." Elaine broke the heaviness with a smile. "And if you get nervous, just think of it as an adventure. Planes are like floating buses with better snacks." That drew a laugh from both kids, and the tension eased. After breakfast, Nathaniel helped them check their bags one last time. Passport, boarding passes, snacks, headphones, the stuffed rabbit. He watched Naomi tuck the rabbit carefully into the front pocket of her backpack as if it were the most precious cargo on the flight. On the drive to JFK, the city moved around them, yellow cabs honking, street vendors setting up for the day, pedestrians wrapped in coats against the early spring chill. Nathaniel's mind was far away, though he thought of boardroom battles, of contracts worth billions, of the respect he commanded in the world of finance. Yet he also thought of the invisible battles his children would face, the looks, the whispers, the doubts cast on them before they even spoke. Elaine placed a hand on his knee from the passenger seat, grounding him. "They'll be fine," she said softly, as if she could read his thoughts. He nodded, but didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the twins in the back seat. Jordan stared out the window, lost in thought. Naomi hummed a tune to herself, swinging her legs at the terminal. The family paused at the curb. The sky above the airport stretched wide and gray, planes roaring overhead. Nathaniel crouched to meet his children's eyes. "This is it," he said. "Remember what I told you." Jordan hugged him tightly. Naomi kissed his cheek and whispered, "We'll be brave, Dad." They walked toward the unaccompanied miner's counter, their small backpacks bouncing with each step. Nathaniel watched until the crowd swallowed them. Only then did he allow the sigh to escape, long and heavy. Elaine slipped her arm through his. They'll have their own stories now. Let them live them. Nathaniel nodded. But inside, a question haunted him. What kind of story will it be? He had no idea that in just a few hours, the answer would reach him not through quiet phone calls from his children, but through millions of strangers on a screen. The bustle of John F. Kennedy International Airport swallowed the twins the moment they stepped inside with their parents. The glass wall shimmered in the morning light, and the soundscape was a mix of rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, and the hum of thousands of people moving toward their own destinations. Jordan and Naomi stayed close together, their backpacks snug on their shoulders. Naomi clutched her stuffed rabbit like a shield, while Jordan tried to look older than he felt, as though the weight of being the big brother gave him a role to play. Nathaniel guided them toward the unaccompanied miner counter, his tall figure commanding attention even in the crowd. Elaine walked beside him, her scarf tucked neatly into her coat. The twins could sense their parents' steadying presence, though both adults carried a quiet current of nerves beneath their calm. At the counter, a young airline employee bent down with a practiced smile. "Jordan and Naomi Cole. Welcome. You'll be flying with us today." She handed each of them a lanyard with a plastic pouch, their names printed in bold letters. "This tells everyone you're traveling as UM. Don't lose it." Naomi slipped hers over her neck, admiring the badge. Jordan adjusted his and asked, "Will we be sitting together?" "Of course," the employee said. "You have row 2, seats A and B, first class." The words made Naomi's eyes sparkle. She'd heard about first class from her dad, bigger seats, better snacks, a world above the cramped rows in the back. She tugged Jordan's sleeve. "We're really doing it," she whispered. Nathaniel crouched down in front of them once more. His voice was steady, but Elaine noticed a slight tension at the edge of his jaw. "Remember what we talked about this morning? Your seats are yours. You belong there." Jordan nodded firmly. Naomi whispered, "We know." "Dad," the airline escort arrived, a cheerful young man named Kevin with an orange vest. "Okay, twins, let's get you to the gate." "Mom, Dad, you can walk with us until security." The family moved together through the long lines, the trays of laptops and shoes, the shuffle of passengers preparing to travel. At security, Nathaniel hugged his children once more, holding them longer than necessary. "You're stronger than you think," he told them. Elaine kissed their cheeks, whispering blessings only a mother could weave. "Call me when you land." Kevin led the twins forward, their small figures merging with the river of travelers. Nathaniel and Elaine stood on the other side of the rope, watching until the children disappeared into the tide of passengers. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Elaine said softly, "Let them go." Nathaniel exhaled, but his eyes lingered on the path the twins had taken. He had built empires and signed contracts worth millions, and stood unflinching in front of boards and investors. Yet nothing made him feel as vulnerable as watching his children walk out of reach. At the gate, Jordan and Naomi settled into seats near the window. Kevin stayed close, chatting lightly to keep them at ease. Through the wide glass, they could see their plane waiting, its white body gleaming against the wet tarmac. The engines hummed in low preparation. Naomi pressed her forehead to the glass. "Do you think Grandma will make her peach cobbler tonight?" Jordan grinned. "She always does when we visit." Kevin checked his watch, then leaned down. "Boarding will start soon. You two are in the first group. Pretty cool." "Huh," Jordan straightened. "First class." He liked the way it sounded, like a badge of honor. Nearby, a woman in a tailored coat glanced at them curiously. Her eyes lingered on the UM badges, then shifted away. The twins didn't notice, but Kevin did. He gave them a reassuring nod, as though to say, "Ignore the looks. You're fine." When the announcement came, Kevin led them down the jet bridge. The metallic walls echoed with footsteps and the distant thrum of the plane's systems. Jordan's stomach fluttered with a mix of nerves and excitement. Naomi squeezed his hand, her rabbit tucked under her arm. At the aircraft door, Grace Turner greeted them with warmth that felt genuine. "Welcome aboard, Jordan and Naomi." She crouched slightly, meeting their eyes. "You're my VIPs today. Let's get you to row 2. The twins followed her down the aisle, their sneakers patting on the carpet. Passengers already seated glanced at them briefly, some with smiles, some with indifference, and one or two with curiosity that carried unspoken judgment. Jordan didn't fully notice, but Naomi felt it. She lowered her gaze, clutching her rabbit tighter. Row 2 awaited with plush seats and folded blankets. Grace helped them stow their bags and handed them safety cards, speaking with patience. "These are your seats. Make yourselves comfortable." Jordan sat tall, pressing buttons to see the seat move. Naomi giggled, testing her light. For a brief, glowing moment, they felt nothing but wonder. But then footsteps clicked sharply down the aisle. A shadow fell across row 2, and a voice cut the air. "No," the woman said, each syllable clipped with distaste. "Absolutely not." Jordan turned. Naomi's breath caught. Standing in the aisle was Veronica Whitfield, her pearl necklace gleaming, her face set in cold disapproval. The twins didn't yet understand what was about to unfold. But Grace, standing nearby, felt the temperature in the cabin drop. She knew this was the beginning of something larger than any of them imagined. Veronica Whitfield adjusted the strap of her designer handbag as she stepped into the cabin. The familiar fragrance of leather and perfume trailing with her. To the untrained eye, she looked like an accomplished woman, polished hair, pearl necklace resting confidently at her throat, and the practiced air of someone who had lived her life believing the world owed her deference. She had taken this same route hundreds of times, business trips with her late husband, vacations to Europe, holiday visits to her son in California. First class had always been her stage, and she wore her entitlement like a tailored coat. But today, the sight that greeted her sent a ripple of displeasure across her features. Row 2. Her seat occupied. Not just occupied, but occupied by 2 children, black children, twins, their feet not even touching the floor. A stuffed rabbit perched on the girl's lap. They laughed softly to each other, completely unaware of the storm about to break. Veronica's steps faltered. Her eyes narrowed. A tension built in her chest. One she had long ago stopped questioning. To her, it was instinct, the kind of reflex she thought of as standards. She reached row 2, paused, and let her voice slice through the cabin. "Excuse me, there must be some mistake." Grace Turner, just a few rows away, straightened. She had been watching Veronica's approach with unease. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Can I help you find your seat?" Veronica held out her boarding pass like evidence in a trial. "Seat 2C, here, and I will not be sitting here." Her gaze flicked deliberately to Naomi and Jordan. The children froze, sensing the weight behind her tone. Naomi instinctively hugged her rabbit tighter. Jordan tried to look unaffected, though his small hands clenched the armrest. Grace's professional smile held steady, though her stomach tightened. "These children are seated correctly. Ma'am, they're in 2A and 2B. Your seat, 2C, is beside them." "No," Veronica replied, louder this time. Passengers nearby turned their heads. "I won't sit next to them. Find me another seat." Jordan shifted uncomfortably. He remembered his father's words that morning. "You belong anywhere your ticket takes you." But in this moment, those words felt fragile, as though they might shatter under the sharp edge of the woman's disdain. Naomi's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried enough for Grace to hear. Did we do something wrong? Grace's heart squeezed. She crouched slightly, lowering her voice so the twins could hear. "You've done nothing wrong. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." Veronica crossed her arms, impatience radiating from her. "Look, I have flown this airline for 30 years. I pay for comfort, for peace. I did not pay to babysit someone else's children. Certainly not in first class." The businessman in row 3 shifted, clearing his throat. He looked as though he might speak, but stopped himself, lowering his eyes back to his tablet. The silence of complicity settled in the air. Grace straightened, her tone firming. "These children are ticketed passengers. Ma'am, they will remain in their seats." Veronica's lips curved into something between a sneer and a smile. "Then call the captain. I want to hear from him directly. Let's see how loyal this airline really is to its longtime customers." The words stung, not because Grace doubted her captain, but because she had heard this line before. The veiled assertion that some passengers mattered more than others. That loyalty points or social standing weighed heavier than human dignity. The children sat quietly, the tension thick around them. Naomi pressed her face into her rabbit's fur. Jordan looked straight ahead, jaw set, pretending he didn't hear. But inside, he heard every word. Grace walked briskly to the front, her pulse quickening. She leaned into the cockpit door and spoke softly. "Captain Briggs, I need you in the cabin. There's a situation in row 2, inside the cockpit." Captain Samuel Briggs glanced at his first officer, Lila Fernandez. His expression hardened. "What kind of situation?" Grace hesitated, then said plainly, "A passenger refusing to sit beside 2 children. Because they're black?" The captain's silence stretched for a beat. Then he unbuckled his harness. "I'll handle it." Back in row 2. Veronica was tapping her boarding pass against her palm, her irritation building. She felt the stares of other passengers but interpreted them as sympathy, not judgment. She had lived her life in circles where people rarely challenged her, and she expected no different here. When Captain Briggs appeared, his uniform crisp, his presence calm, yet commanding, the cabin's energy shifted. Conversations hushed. Eyes followed him as he walked down the aisle. He stopped at row 2, his gaze moving from Veronica to the twins, then to Grace. "What seems to be the problem?" Veronica lifted her chin. "The problem, Captain, is that I won't sit here, not next to them. You'll need to move them elsewhere." Briggs studied her, his face unreadable. Then he crouched slightly, turning to Jordan and Naomi. His voice softened. "How are you 2 doing?" Naomi blinked, unsure how to answer. Jordan swallowed hard. We just want to fly, sir." The simplicity of it pierced the air, leaving no place for Veronica's words to hide. Briggs stood, his voice steady but firm, carrying through the cabin. "These children are seated correctly. They have as much right to be here as anyone else. More than that, they will remain here. Ma'am, if you cannot take your assigned seat, you are welcome to leave this aircraft." Gasps whispered through the cabin. A man in row 4 muttered, "About time." Someone else pulled out a phone, the quiet click of recording unmistakable. Veronica's face flushed, her composure cracking. "This is outrageous. I am a platinum member. I will not be treated like this." Briggs's gaze didn't waver. "What's outrageous is suggesting children be removed from their seats because of the color of their skin. That won't happen on my aircraft." The silence that followed was heavier than the roar of any engine. Passengers stared, some with admiration, some with discomfort at being witnesses to truth spoken aloud. Jordan's shoulders eased slightly. Naomi's grip on her rabbit loosened, just enough to breathe again. Veronica, however, bristled, her voice rising. "You'll regret this, Captain. I'll have your job." Briggs leaned closer, his words quiet but unyielding. "If keeping my job means agreeing with prejudice, then I'll gladly walk away. But these children stay." It was the first fracture in Veronica's confidence. For the first time, she realized the stares around her weren't approving, they were condemning. The murmurs weren't support, they were disgust. She stood frozen, caught in a spotlight of her own making, and the twins, who had started this flight with nothing but excitement, now sat at the center of a moment that would travel far beyond this cabin. The cabin seemed to hold its breath after Captain Briggs's words. Passengers looked between him and Veronica, unsure of what might come next. Some eyes carried quiet approval, others apprehension. A few people shifted in their seats, debating whether to pull out their phones to record more openly. Veronica broke the silence first. She scoffed, clutching her handbag tighter. You'll hear from my attorney. This is discrimination against me." Her words carried a tremor, though she masked it with indignation. Briggs didn't reply immediately. He held her gaze, calm and steady, and then spoke with a quiet certainty. "This conversation is over. Ma'am, please take your seat or disembark." The firmness in his voice left no room for negotiation. Still, Veronica remained frozen, pearl necklace trembling slightly as she drew breath to argue again. That was when a voice rose from row 3. Captain, the businessman who had earlier buried himself in his tablet, now spoke. He was a tall black man in his 50s, dressed in a tailored suit that suggested quiet success. He stood, smoothing his jacket, his eyes sharp. "My name is Anthony Miles. I've been flying this airline for 20 years, and I want to say thank you for doing the right thing." The weight of his words cut through the tension. Passengers turned to look at him. Anthony glanced at Jordan and Naomi, his expression softening. "These children belong here just as much as I do, just as much as any of us, and I won't sit silent while someone tells them otherwise." The twins blinked, surprised that someone outside of their family would speak so boldly for them. Jordan straightened a little in his seat. Naomi's cheeks flushed with something close to pride. Veronica rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. This isn't about race. It's exactly about race," Anthony interrupted, his tone sharp but controlled. "And you know it." The murmur in the cabin grew louder. A woman 2 rows back whispered, "He's right." Another nodded, pulling her phone higher to record. Grace Turner felt her throat tighten. She had served thousands of flights, seen countless arguments about baggage space and meal service, but rarely did someone speak up this clearly, this directly. She felt a swell of gratitude toward Anthony, and a flicker of hope that the children might remember his courage as much as they remembered Veronica's cruelty. Then another voice joined. An older woman near the window of row 4 rose slowly, steadying herself on the armrest. She had silver hair cut neatly, and her posture carried the dignity of a life lived with purpose. "My name is Dorothy Ellis," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. "I flew in the 60s when some of us weren't even allowed to sit where we wanted. I've seen what silence costs, and I won't be silent today." Her declaration carried the weight of history. For a moment, the cabin seemed to tilt past and present, colliding in the narrow aisle of Flight 882. Naomi's small hand found Jordan's. He squeezed back, his chest lifting as though Dorothy's words gave him permission to breathe deeper. Veronica's face reddened. She glanced around, expecting allies, but found only eyes that avoided hers or glared with disapproval. For the first time, she realized she stood alone. Captain Briggs acknowledged Anthony and Dorothy with a nod of respect. "Thank you both." Then he returned his focus to Veronica. "The choice remains yours, ma'am. Sit or leave, but this aircraft will not depart under the shadow of prejudice." The businessman in row 3 sat back down, calm but resolute. Dorothy lowered herself gently into her seat, her expression unwavering. The passengers now buzzed with quiet conversations. Phones angled discreetly, recording history in real time. Grace knew this video would not remain confined to this cabin. She could almost feel the pulse of the internet already waiting for it. Veronica inhaled sharply, standing straighter. "You're all making a spectacle of nothing. I simply asked for respect. Respect is earned," Anthony said from behind his tablet now resting on his lap, "and you've shown none to these children." The words landed with finality. Veronica faltered, clutching her handbag tighter, then turned abruptly, striding back up the aisle. Her heels clicked in sharp rhythm against the carpet. Passengers watched, murmuring, some shaking their heads. A few applauded softly, the sound growing louder, gathering strength. The applause reached Jordan and Naomi's ears like a bomb. Naomi looked at Jordan, her eyes wide. "They're clapping for us." Jordan smiled tentatively. "I think they are." Grace crouched beside them, her voice soft but proud. "You two are braver than you know." Jordan swallowed the lump in his throat. He remembered his father's words. "You belong anywhere your ticket takes you." Maybe his dad had been right after all. Captain Briggs placed a hand on the seat back in front of the twins, steady as stone. "You've done nothing wrong. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, and this plane will fly because of that truth." The moment crystallized, etched into every passenger's memory. What had begun as a confrontation had become something larger, a stand, a lesson, a reminder. And though the plane hadn't yet left the ground, Jordan and Naomi already felt like they were flying. The applause faded into a low hum of conversation. Passengers trading glances and whispers, their screens still lit as phones discreetly captured the unfolding scene. For a fleeting moment, it felt like the tension had broken. But the storm was not over. Veronica Whitfield had not surrendered. She had only retreated to regroup. At the front of the cabin, she stood near the galley, her pearl necklace trembling slightly as her chest rose and fell. She pulled out her phone with a swift, almost theatrical motion, dialing with manicured fingers. Grace Turner kept one eye on her while pouring water into a plastic cup. She could hear Veronica's clipped words into the receiver. "Yes, I'm on flight 882. First class. They're allowing forcing me to sit next to two children, black children. This is unacceptable. I demand this be fixed." Her voice carried far enough that nearby passengers exchanged uneasy looks. Grace wanted to intervene but held back. She had learned that sometimes the worst thing you could do was fuel a fire while it was burning. Back in row 2. Jordan stared at the back of Veronica's head, his small fist tightening. Naomi whispered, "She's calling someone. Do you think she's trying to get us off the plane?" Jordan didn't answer. Inside, his chest burned with confusion and anger. His father's words echoed again, but now they tangled with fear. "You belong here." What if the world didn't agree? Captain Samuel Briggs returned quietly from the cockpit, scanning the aisle with the eyes of a man who had managed storms both in the sky and on the ground. He stepped into the galley. "Ma'am, who are you calling?" Veronica looked up, her chin high, the airline's executive line. "I know people. You'll regret embarrassing me like this." Briggs's jaw flexed, but his voice stayed calm. "You may call whomever you wish. But understand this, my responsibility is the safety and dignity of everyone on this aircraft. Those children are not moving. Period." Her lips parted, but he continued before she could argue. You have two options: take your seat or leave this flight. That is final. The firmness in his tone silenced her for a moment. Passengers close by held their breath, waiting. Grace noticed Anthony Miles watching intently. His phone angled slightly, capturing the exchange. Dorothy Ellis closed her eyes, whispering something that sounded like a prayer. Naomi tugged at her brother's sleeve. "Jordan," she whispered, "I don't like it here. Everyone's staring." Jordan turned to her, trying to muster courage he didn't quite feel. "It's okay. Dad said we belong here. Remember," his voice cracked on the last word, but Naomi nodded, gripping her rabbit tighter. Briggs leaned closer to Veronica, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Ma'am, I flew combat missions. I've lost friends in the sky. I will not let prejudice ground this flight. Do you understand me?" For a split second, something flickered in her eyes: surprise, maybe even doubt, but then her pride surged again, louder than reason. She turned away, muttering, "You'll hear from my lawyer." Grace exhaled slowly as Briggs returned to the cockpit. She knelt beside the twins once more, her hand resting lightly on the armrest. "You're safe." Don't let her words sink into you. You're stronger than you know. Jordan met her eyes, searching for truth. Naomi rested her cheek against her rabbit, whispering to herself, "We're supposed to be here." The passengers around them shifted in their seats, some nodding at the twins, small gestures of solidarity. A woman in row 5 leaned forward, offering Naomi a stick of gum. A young man across the aisle whispered to Jordan, "You're brave, kid." But the air still carried the sting of Veronica's words. The boarding door remained open, the last passengers still trickling in. Lila Fernandez, the first officer, stepped into the cabin briefly, her dark eyes scanning the scene. She caught Grace's gaze, then nodded slightly, as if to say, "I'm watching too." The tension wasn't just about one passenger anymore. It was about everyone in the cabin, their choices, their silence, their willingness to witness. Veronica returned to her seat finally, sliding into 2C with a dramatic sigh, as though she were the one wronged. She placed her handbag carefully on her lap, ignoring the twins beside her. Jordan stared straight ahead, pretending she wasn't there. Naomi peeked sideways, then quickly looked away. The rabbit between her arms seemed to absorb her trembling. As the door closed and the engines roared to life, the cabin lights dimmed slightly. Grace made her way down the aisle for the safety demonstration, her hands steady though her mind still buzzed. She caught Anthony's eye again. He gave her a small nod of encouragement. Dorothy's gaze met hers too, calm but fierce. The plane began to taxi. Passengers settled, but the undercurrent of unease remained. Veronica sat rigid, arms crossed, lips pursed. The twins leaned together, whispering, trying to comfort one another as the aircraft rumbled toward the runway. Naomi whispered, "Jordan, do you think she'll talk to us again?" Jordan shook his head. "Doesn't matter. We're not moving." The engines thundered louder, the nose lifted, and Flight 882 rose into the cloudy sky. For most passengers, takeoff was routine, but for two children in row 2, it felt like lifting into a battle where dignity itself was the prize. High above the city, the plane banked toward Houston, Veronica sat stiff, refusing to glance at the twins. Yet, every so often, she caught reflections in the darkened window, Anthony watching. Dorothy, quietly resolute. Grace walking the aisle with her head high. And for the first time in a long time, Veronica felt something she did not recognize. Not anger, not superiority, something closer to isolation. Meanwhile, Jordan and Naomi pressed their heads together, sharing headphones, whispering about what they'd do at Grandma's house. It was their way of clinging to normalcy. But beneath their small smiles lingered questions too heavy for children. Why us? Why here? The cabin had steadied. But no one forgot the storm waiting just beneath the surface. The seatbelt sign pinged off with a soft chime, and the cabin seemed to exhale. Passengers shifted, attendants prepared drink carts, and the hum of conversation returned in cautious waves. But in row 2, the tension never loosened. Veronica Whitfield sat rigidly, her handbag clutched like a shield. The twins leaned slightly toward one another, their whispered voices nearly drowned by the drone of the engines. Grace Turner rolled the beverage cart forward, her smile professional, her tone even. She stopped at row 2. Would anyone care for something to drink? Naomi looked up timidly. Could I have some apple juice? Please, of course. Grace poured it with care, sliding the cup onto Naomi's tray table. She turned to Jordan. And for you, water, please, Jordan said. His voice carried more steadiness than he felt. Grace handed him the cup, her eyes soft, encouraging. She turned to Veronica, whose lips were pressed in a thin line. I'll have sparkling water. With lemon, Veronica said, her tone sharp, as though even the drink order were a battlefield. Grace placed the cup down gently, unbothered by the edge in Veronica's voice. Here you go, ma'am. Veronica didn't thank her. Instead, she turned toward Naomi, her voice icy. You know, children like you should be in coach. It's more appropriate. The words landed heavy, sharper than the altitude outside. Naomi's face fell. She lowered her eyes, staring at her untouched juice. Jordan's jaw tightened, his fingers curling around the cup of water until his knuckles whitened. Grace froze. She set her hand firmly on the cart handle. Ma'am, she said, her voice low but strong. That's enough. Passengers nearby had already started leaning closer. Anthony Miles, in row 3, angled his phone higher. Dorothy Ellis straightened in her seat, her silver hair catching the cabin lights as she watched. Jordan turned slowly toward Veronica. His voice shook but carried an undercurrent of courage. My dad paid for these seats. He said, we belong here, and we do. The statement silenced the air. Even the hum of the engines felt distant for a moment. Veronica let out a harsh laugh. Oh, sweet boy, you'll learn the world doesn't work that way. Anthony's voice cut in, loud enough to carry. The world only works that way when people like you are allowed to go unchecked. Several passengers murmured agreement. One woman in row 5 said, he's right, while another leaned across the aisle to whisper to Naomi, don't listen to her, honey. Grace steadied herself. Captain Briggs gave you a choice, ma'am. If you continue harassing these children, I will not hesitate to call them back. The challenge hung between them. Veronica's face flushed crimson, her breath quickened. But before she could retort, the seatbelt sign dinged again. A ripple of turbulence shook the cabin, glasses rattling softly on tray tables. Grace braced herself against the cart. Jordan instinctively reached for Naomi's hand. Veronica, startled, gripped her armrest. The turbulence subsided, but the shift in atmosphere remained. It was as if the plane itself had reminded everyone how fragile control really was. Anthony leaned slightly into the aisle, his voice steady. "Children, remember this. Her words don't define you. They reveal her. Nothing more." Naomi's eyes glistened, but she nodded. Jordan gave a small, grateful smile. Veronica scoffed, but her voice no longer carried the same authority. She could feel the weight of the cabin pressing back against her, the passengers, the crew, even the captain's earlier words still hanging in the air. Dorothy Ellis finally spoke again, her tone like tempered steel. "Young lady," she said to Veronica, "I sat on buses where I was told the same thing. Sit at the back, know your place. And I promised myself I'd never let another child hear those words without someone answering back. So, here's my answer. These children are right where they belong." The applause came faster this time, no hesitation, dozens of hands clapping, voices murmuring approval, phones lifted higher. Veronica's shoulders stiffened, her face burning under the collective gaze. Grace felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. Not sadness, something closer to relief. Relief that truth still had voices bold enough to speak. Jordan whispered to Naomi, "Did you hear that she's on our side?" Naomi squeezed his hand, whispering back, "So many people are." As Grace pushed the cart down the aisle, she caught Captain Briggs stepping out of the cockpit. He looked at her, then at the cabin alive with clapping. She nodded subtly, assuring him she still had control. He returned her nod, disappearing back behind the reinforced door. Veronica sat in silence now, her sparkling water untouched. She glanced sideways at the twins, but the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. She no longer looked like the woman who commanded the aisle. She looked cornered, her entitlement unraveling. The twins, though still shaken, leaned back in their seats. For the first time since boarding, Naomi sipped her juice. Jordan allowed his shoulders to relax, if only slightly. The flight pressed forward, but the memory of what had just unfolded lingered like an imprint on the cabin walls. It wasn't just about a single confrontation anymore. It had become a reckoning, a mirror held up to everyone present. Anthony returned to his tablet, but not before giving the twins a reassuring nod. Dorothy folded her hands in her lap, her expression calm, as though she had carried the weight of such battles before. And Grace, steadying her cart, felt a quiet pride, not in herself alone, but in the passengers who had chosen courage over silence. High above the clouds, Flight 882 carried more than travelers. It carried a lesson. Silence was no longer acceptable. The hum of the engines had settled into a steady rhythm, the kind that usually lulled passengers into reading, sleeping, or losing themselves in movies. But in row 2, no one had relaxed. Veronica Whitfield sat in rigid silence, her fingers drumming against her handbag, her jaw clenched tight. The twins leaned closer together, sharing headphones, though their eyes darted often toward her. Grace Turner, pacing the aisle with deliberate calm, kept watch like a sentry. The tension in the cabin was heavy enough to feel physical. Passengers who had applauded earlier now whispered among themselves, exchanging looks of both disbelief and solidarity. Anthony Miles's phone rested on his tray table, still recording in plain sight. Dorothy Ellis gazed out the window, her reflection in the glass stern, as though she were seeing both the present and the past. Then the turbulence began. It started as a small shiver underfoot, the kind most passengers ignored. A second tremor followed, sharper this time, rattling cups on tray tables. Gasps rippled through the cabin. The seatbelt sign chimed on with a tone that now sounded urgent rather than routine. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seat belts," came Captain Briggs's calm but firm voice over the intercom. Grace hurried forward, securing loose items, checking passengers as she moved. The twins had already buckled themselves in, Naomi clutching her rabbit tightly. Jordan's hands gripped the armrests, knuckles white. Veronica, though strapped in, muttered under her breath, "Of course, perfect timing." The plane jolted again, harder. Overhead bins creaked, a few bags shifting audibly. A nervous laugh bubbled from somewhere in the back of the cabin, quickly stifled. Anthony leaned slightly toward the twins, his voice calm despite the shuddering around them. "You're safe. Just hold on. Pilots know how to handle this." Naomi looked at him, her eyes wide. "Are we gonna fall?" "No," Anthony said simply, with such certainty that Naomi took a shaky breath and nodded. Another jolt struck, sharper still. A drink cart, not yet fully stowed in the galley, rolled slightly before a flight attendant braced it. Dorothy closed her eyes, lips moving silently in prayer. Grace crouched low by row 2, her hand steadying Naomi's tray. "You're okay. Think of it like bumps on a road," she said, her voice gentle. "Your captain has flown through worse than this." The turbulence rattled again, more violent this time. A few shrieks rose from the back. A baby cried. The lights flickered once, then steadied. In row 2, Naomi pressed closer to her brother. "Jordan." "I'm scared," she whispered. Jordan swallowed hard. "Me too, but we'll get through it." His words were brave, but his eyes betrayed his fear. Veronica let out a sharp laugh, tension breaking through as bitterness. "This airline is falling apart. Children in first class, turbulence shaking us like dice. What's next?" Her words were loud enough to cut through the cabin noise. Heads turned again, disbelieving. Even in the midst of turbulence, her disdain found space. Grace's patience snapped. "Enough." "Ma'am." Her voice was firm, no longer wrapped in customer service softness. "This is not the time for insults. Everyone here is scared. These children are scared, and your words help no one." The rebuke struck harder than the turbulence itself. Veronica's face went pale, her lips pressed tight. For the first time, she did not respond. Another jolt hit, and then, almost as suddenly as it had begun, the turbulence eased, the plane steadied, the shaking subsided into a low hum once more. Passengers exhaled in relief, nervous laughter and whispered prayers filling the air. Captain Briggs' voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We encountered a patch of unstable air, but we are now clear. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off." A round of applause broke out, scattered but heartfelt. Naomi exhaled loudly, unclenching her grip on the rabbit. Jordan leaned back, finally loosening his hold on the armrests. Grace gave them both a reassuring smile. Anthony spoke softly. "See, just like bumps in the road?" Naomi managed a small smile. "Okay." Dorothy opened her eyes, nodding slowly. "Storms pass. They always do, but though the turbulence had ended, its impact lingered. The cabin was quieter now, subdued. The earlier confrontation felt heavier, reframed by the brush with fear. It wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about how people revealed themselves under pressure who offered comfort and who chose cruelty. Veronica shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, she seemed diminished. Her earlier outbursts now looked smaller, pettier, when set against the storm they had just endured together. She glanced sideways at the twins, but quickly looked away, as though their very presence reflected her own shame back at her. Grace, still standing near row 2, let her shoulders drop slightly. The worst had passed. She knelt briefly beside the twins, speaking softly. "You two did so well. You were braver than you know," Jordan whispered back. "We just held on. That's all any of us can do," Grace said, her smile gentle. As she rose, Dorothy's voice floated across the aisle. "Sometimes storms show us who we really are, and sometimes they show us who we could be." Passengers listened, her words carrying the quiet authority of lived truth. Anthony nodded in agreement, his eyes resting on the twins. They'll remember this, not the shaking, the way people stood up for them. Grace looked around the cabin. Phones still hovered, recording. She knew these videos would spread turbulence, confrontation, dignity defended. The world outside this cabin would soon see everything. For Jordan and Naomi, though the most important part wasn't the cameras. It was the realization that they weren't alone. Not here, not now, and high above the clouds, as Flight 882 carved its path through the sky. The storm had become something more than weather. It had become a mirror. When the turbulence subsided, passengers slowly settled back into uneasy calm. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, steady as a heartbeat. But row 2 remained the focal point, a stage where every glance, every whisper carried weight. Jordan leaned his head against the window, watching clouds glide past like soft mountains. He tried to let the sight calm him, but his chest still carried the echo of Veronica's words. Beside him, Naomi traced the outline of her rabbit's ears, whispering, "I wish Mom and Dad were here." "I know," Jordan said softly. He wanted to promise her it would all be okay, but the words caught in his throat. Grace Turner made another pass through the cabin, checking seat belts, picking up empty cups. Her smile stayed in place, but inside she wrestled with anger. She had seen rude passengers, entitled passengers, even drunk ones, but the open contempt Veronica had shown the twins cut deeper than anything she could remember. How many times have they heard words like that before, Grace wondered, and how many more will they hear as she reached row 2? Veronica's voice drifted into the aisle again, quieter now but laced with venom. She wasn't speaking to Grace or the twins. She was leaning toward another passenger, a middle-aged man with graying hair across the aisle. "You know," Veronica whispered, not as quiet as she thought, "this is exactly why first-class standards are slipping. They let anyone in these days. Children, and not the right kind either. The man shifted uncomfortably. He didn't reply. His eyes flicked toward Grace, then down at his magazine, as though hoping the words would dissolve if he ignored them. But Anthony Miles heard. He leaned forward from row 3, his voice clear enough to cut through Veronica's attempt at secrecy. "Still talking?" Veronica stiffened. "Excuse me." Anthony's gaze was sharp, unyielding. I said, "Still talking." After the captain spoke, after this entire cabin made it clear, you just don't quit, do you? A few passengers looked up again, tension pulling their attention forward. Dorothy Ellis shook her head slowly, her lips pressed thin, eyes narrowing at Veronica. Grace's patience stretched thin, but she steadied herself. This wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about making sure Jordan and Naomi didn't carry the weight of Veronica's poison alone. She crouched beside them, her voice gentle. "Do you two want me to move her?" Naomi blinked. "Surprised? Can you?" Grace hesitated. Policy said passengers could be reseated if conflicts escalated. But moving the twins would feel like conceding ground they had every right to hold. She looked at Jordan, searching his expression. Jordan's jaw set firm. "No, we stay." Something in his tone, small but resolute, made Grace's chest ache with pride. "Okay," she said softly. "Then I'll stay too." Veronica scoffed. "Ridiculous. You're coddling them." Anthony sat forward, his voice cold. "She's protecting them. Something you should try learning." The man Veronica had whispered to finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Ma'am, maybe you should stop talking." His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly, but his words carried weight. It was a small rebellion, but it cracked something open. For the first time, Veronica's head snapped back in surprise. She was losing her audience. Passengers nearby began murmuring louder now, not against Grace or the twins, but against Veronica. Unbelievable. Why doesn't she stop? It's disgusting. The whispers grew, building pressure like unseen weather. Jordan heard it all. For the first time since boarding, the voices around him didn't sting, they shielded. He glanced at Naomi, whispering, "See, we're not alone." Naomi's lips curved into the smallest smile. "Yeah." Veronica shifted in her seat, cheeks flushed. She turned away, but the sting of disapproval from dozens of eyes pressed on her like weight she couldn't shake. Grace rose, exhaling quietly. She looked down the aisle, catching Captain Briggs's silhouette through the cockpit door window. She knew he'd intervene again if necessary, but for now, the passengers themselves were stepping up, and that carried its own power. Dorothy finally spoke, her voice carrying through the hush. "I was younger than these children when I first heard words like yours, ma'am, and I promised I'd never sit quiet again. I'm too old to break that promise now." The murmur of agreement swelled again. A man in row 6 clapped once, sharply. Someone else followed. Soon, a ripple of applause spread not loud, but steady, deliberate, like a drumbeat against silence. Veronica shrank back in her seat, her pearl necklace trembling with her shallow breaths. For the first time, she looked less like the woman in control and more like someone cornered by her own arrogance. Grace leaned slightly toward the twins. "You see, people are with you. Don't forget that." Jordan nodded slowly, the tightness in his chest easing just a little. Naomi tucked her rabbit under her chin, whispering. "We belong here." "Yes, you do," Grace said firmly. The cabin settled again, but the shift was undeniable. Veronica wasn't just one passenger anymore. She had become a symbol of something larger, and the passengers had chosen their side. Phones still recorded, and Grace knew the videos would spread far beyond Flight 882. But, for now, the most important audience was two children in row 2, learning in real time that even in the face of hate, voices could rise to answer back, and though clouds stretched endlessly outside, the cabin itself felt brighter lit by courage shared, dignity defended. By the time Flight 882 leveled at cruising altitude, the air inside the first-class cabin felt almost heavier than the sky outside. Phones were still raised, their screens glowing, and every whisper seemed to carry the sense that something much bigger than a simple in-flight disagreement had taken root. Anthony Miles adjusted his seat slightly, glancing at the video still recording on his phone. He hadn't planned on sharing it at first, but the more Veronica's words replayed in his head, the more he felt it needed to be seen. Quiet dignity in the face of contempt wasn't something to keep private. He tapped send. The clip uploaded to his social media account with a short caption. "This happened today on Flight 882. Two children told they don't belong in first class. Watch how the crew and passengers responded." He set the phone down, the decision made. In row 2, Jordan leaned back in his seat, headphones slipping down around his neck. He turned to Naomi. "Do you think Dad would be mad if he saw all this?" Naomi tilted her head, thoughtful. "I think he'd be proud. You didn't let her make us move?" Jordan gave a small smile but didn't answer. Inside, though, her words stitched something steady in his chest. Grace Turner came by again, checking on everyone, her voice soft, movements deliberate. She paused at row 2. "You both need anything?" Naomi shook her head. Jordan asked, "Can we just have some quiet?" Grace nodded. "You've got it. If you need me, I'll be right here." She squeezed Jordan's shoulder lightly, then continued down the aisle. Across the cabin, Dorothy Ellis was scrolling through her own phone with slow, careful fingers. She whispered to the man seated beside her, "It's already online. Look here, thousands of views, and it's only been minutes." Indeed. The clip was spreading. Notifications pinged on Anthony's phone like raindrops on glass. Comments began to flood in unbelievable. "These kids are heroes. That captain deserves a medal." Veronica noticed. She caught sight of Anthony's screen, the video unmistakable even from a distance. Her face paled, then flushed crimson. She leaned forward, her voice sharp but low. "Delete that. You have no right to record me." Anthony didn't flinch. "I have every right to record what happens in a public cabin. And frankly, people need to see this." "Defamation," Veronica hissed. "I'll sue." Anthony's eyes narrowed. Truth isn't defamation. The exchange was loud enough for nearby passengers to catch. A murmur rippled again, small nods, quiet affirmations. Dorothy, without looking up from her phone, added, "You should be more worried about your conscience than your reputation." Veronica turned away sharply, her pearl necklace trembling as she clutched it. For the first time, she reached for the call button above her seat, pressing it firmly. Grace returned almost instantly. "Yes. Ma'am, I demand you order him to delete that video," Veronica said, pointing at Anthony with a trembling hand. Grace's professional tone held, but there was no hesitation in her words. "I can't do that. Passengers are free to record as long as they're not interfering with safety." Veronica's jaw dropped. "You're siding with him." Grace met her gaze evenly. "I'm siding with what's right." The firmness in her tone made even Veronica blink. Grace turned smoothly, continuing down the aisle, leaving Veronica fuming in her seat. Meanwhile, Naomi leaned toward Jordan, whispering, "People all over the world are gonna see this." Jordan hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, maybe they'll see what she said. Maybe they'll know it's not okay." Naomi hugged her rabbit tighter, her voice soft. "I hope they see us too, not just her." The thought lingered with Jordan. He didn't want to be remembered as the kid who got told he didn't belong. He wanted to be remembered as the kid who stayed. Minutes later, Anthony's phone buzzed again. He leaned back, showing Dorothy. "Look at this 500,000 views already." Dorothy smiled faintly. "The truth moves fast when it's ready to be heard." The cabin lights dimmed slightly as flight attendants prepared meal service. Yet the glow of phones seemed to illuminate the space, small screens carrying the moment beyond the cabin walls. Passengers whispered updates to one another. "It's trending. It's on Twitter now. People are already tagging the airline." Grace caught pieces of it as she moved. She thought of Captain Briggs, still steady behind the cockpit door, and wondered if he knew yet how far this was reaching. She thought of Jordan and Naomi, and prayed they'd remember not just the cruelty, but the chorus of defiance that rose against it. Veronica, meanwhile, sat with her arms crossed, glaring at the window. Every new notification sound from Anthony's phone seemed to jab at her pride. She had always counted on silence protecting her, on others averting their gaze, but here silence had broken, and the sound of it was deafening. Naomi finally whispered to her brother, "Jordan, yeah. Do you think maybe this will change something?" Jordan looked out at the endless clouds. "Maybe, at least now people can't pretend it doesn't happen." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a truth too old for a 10-year-old boy to have learned. And as Flight 882 pushed forward through the night sky, the world below was already waking up to what had unfolded in its cabin. The steady glow of devices in the cabin only confirmed what Captain Samuel Briggs had already guessed the moment had left the walls of Flight 882 and entered the wider world. He'd been flying for 25 years, but rarely had he felt the gravity of a flight settle so personally on his shoulders. When the first officer, Lila Fernandez, gave him a brief nod, he unbuckled, opened the cockpit door, and stepped into the cabin. The murmur of passengers quieted instantly. Even the twins straightened in their seats, sensing something important was about to happen. Briggs walked down the aisle with measured calm, his presence commanding without theatrics. He stopped near row 2, resting one hand lightly on the headrest in front of him. His gaze swept the cabin passengers, crew, children, and finally Veronica. "I want to speak to all of you," he began. His voice was steady, carrying easily over the soft hum of the engines. I've flown through lightning, across oceans, and into war zones. But I'll tell you this, the storms that do the most damage are the ones inside us. Prejudice, contempt, the belief that some people don't belong. The silence was total. Phones tilted upward, recording. Even the faint clinking of cutlery from the galley stopped. Briggs turned slightly, his eyes settling on Jordan and Naomi. These two children boarded this aircraft with valid tickets. They belong here every bit as much as I do, as much as any of you. And anyone who suggests otherwise isn't just wrong, they're dangerous to what we stand for. Jordan's eyes widened. Naomi clutched her rabbit tighter. Her lips parted as though she couldn't believe the captain was speaking about them. Briggs faced the cabin again. I need you all to understand something. When you're 30,000 feet in the air, safety depends on trust. Trust that the crew will protect you. Trust that your fellow passengers will respect you. Break that trust, and you break the very thing that keeps us aloft. His words landed with the weight of lived conviction. Passengers exchanged glances. Dorothy Ellis nodded slowly, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. Anthony Miles leaned forward, phone still recording but his expression one of admiration. Then Briggs turned to Veronica. Ma'am, I gave you a choice earlier. Sit or leave. You chose to stay. That means you follow the same rules everyone else respect. If you can't, then when we land, the airline will decide your future on these flights. But until then, this is my aircraft, and my word is final. Do you understand? Veronica's lips trembled. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of another outburst, but the collective weight of the cabin pressed against her pride. She glanced away, her pearl necklace shaking faintly as she muttered, "Fine." Briggs nodded once. "Good. Because I promise you no child will ever be told they don't belong on my flight again." The applause erupted instantly, louder than before, filling the cabin with something that felt bigger than gratitude. It was relief, vindication, and hope all at once. Phones captured it from every angle, passengers clapping, some even cheering. Jordan blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. Naomi whispered, "He said we belong." "Yes," Jordan whispered back, his throat tight. "He really did." Briggs raised his hand gently, letting the applause fade. "Now, let's finish this journey together, as equals, as people who share the same sky." He gave the twins one last reassuring nod, then turned and walked back toward the cockpit. The silence that followed him was charged not with tension, but with respect. Grace Turner exhaled, her chest loosening for the first time in hours. She crouched beside the twins, smiling softly. "You'll remember this forever, won't you?" Naomi nodded, tears in her eyes. "I think everyone will." Anthony leaned into the aisle. "Captain Briggs isn't just flying this plane. He's flying a message the whole world needs to hear," Dorothy added quietly, "and it couldn't have come at a better time." The twins sat back, still shaken, but now glowing with a fragile pride. Jordan whispered to Naomi, "Maybe Dad won't be mad after all. Maybe he'll see this and know we stood our ground." Naomi smiled faintly. "We didn't just stand, we stayed." As the cabin slowly returned to its rhythm, meals served, drinks poured, Conversations resumed, the echo of Briggs's words lingered. Phones buzzed with notifications as the video of his speech began to spread just as fast as Anthony's earlier recording. But for those inside Flight 882, the moment wasn't just viral, it was visceral. It had reshaped the cabin into something larger than itself, a space where prejudice had been named and dignity restored. And as the jet carved its path across the night sky, every passenger knew they were part of a story that would land long before the plane touched the runway. The echo of Captain Briggs's words lingered in the cabin long after he returned to the cockpit. The applause had faded, but its residue remained in the air like a protective blanket. Even the hum of the engines seemed softer, steadier, as though the aircraft itself had absorbed the moment. Jordan and Naomi sat quietly in row 2, but their silence wasn't the same as before. Earlier, it had been the silence of fear, of shrinking against someone else's scorn. Now, it was the silence of processing something enormous, something that reached deeper than their 10-year-old minds could fully explain. Naomi held her rabbit close, stroking its ear as if it might whisper reassurance. "Jordan," she said softly, "when the captain talked about us, everyone was looking. I could feel it. I didn't like it at first, but then it felt like they were with us." Jordan nodded. He had felt it too. That strange shift when eyes that once stared in silence began to carry solidarity instead of judgment. "Yeah," he said, his voice low but certain. It was different. Like we weren't just the kids she was yelling at. We were part of something. Grace Turner walked by again, collecting trays and empty cups. She paused at their row, crouching down so her eyes were level with theirs. "How are you two holding up?" Naomi glanced at Jordan, then whispered, "Better." Grace smiled. "Good. You should know what you did by staying in those seats. That mattered to everyone here." Jordan looked at her, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "We didn't do anything. We just sat." Grace shook her head gently. "Sometimes that's the bravest thing you can do, to sit where you belong, even when someone tells you not to." Her words struck something in Jordan. He thought of his father's mantra, "You belong anywhere your ticket takes you." He thought of Naomi's small hand gripping his in defiance. He thought of Captain Briggs standing tall, Anthony and Dorothy speaking up. Maybe Grace was right. Maybe staying had been an act after all. Across the aisle, Anthony leaned forward. "She's right, you know. You two showed strength without even knowing it. That's the kind of thing people remember." Naomi tilted her head. "But why should we have to be strong? We were just flying to Grandma's." The question hit Anthony in the chest. He exhaled slowly, his eyes softening. "You're right. You shouldn't have to. But sometimes the world isn't fair, and when it shows you its worst, your dignity becomes your shield. And today, you held it high," Dorothy added, her voice carrying the weight of memory. "When I was your age, I couldn't sit at certain counters. I couldn't drink from certain fountains. People told me I didn't belong every single day. But I learned something the moment you claim your place and refuse to move. You make it easier for the next person to sit or to drink or to fly. That's what you've done." Naomi's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't just from fear anymore. They were from recognition that something bigger than her had touched her small life. Jordan squeezed her hand, and for once she didn't resist. Veronica sat stiff beside them, her arms crossed, her lips tight. She avoided the children's eyes, but her ears caught every word. Each one felt like a pebble thrown at the fragile wall of superiority she had built around herself. She clenched her jaw, telling herself it was nonsense. And yet, the conviction in their voices unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Grace rose, continuing her rounds, but her heart stayed with the twins. She thought of her own childhood, the times she had felt small in rooms where she wasn't welcomed. She had promised herself then that if she ever had the power, she'd use it to make someone else feel safe. Tonight, she had kept that promise. Jordan leaned closer to Naomi, lowering his voice. "When we get to Grandma's, I'm going to tell her everything, not just the bad stuff, the good stuff too, about Anthony, about Dorothy, about the captain." Naomi nodded, her small fingers tracing circles on the rabbit's fur. "And Grace," she whispered. "Don't forget Grace." Jordan smiled faintly. Yeah, Grace too. Their resolve was small, but it was real, a seed planted in the fertile soil of a night that had tested them. They hadn't chosen to be symbols, but they had become them. And in their quiet determination to hold their place, they had learned that sometimes the strongest statement you can make is simply to remain. The cabin slowly shifted into its nighttime rhythm. Lights dimmed, shades drawn, passengers settling with blankets and pillows. But for Jordan and Naomi, sleep didn't come easily. Their minds replayed the events, their hearts still racing. Yet beneath it all, something new pulsed, a fragile pride, a belief that they had weathered a storm and not been swept away. Anthony closed his eyes, whispering a prayer of thanks that these children had been defended before the damage could deepen. Dorothy leaned back, her face softened by memory, knowing she had witnessed a new generation step into a story far older than they realized. Grace moved quietly between rows, her presence a steady reassurance, and Veronica. She stared out the window at the endless dark, her reflection staring back at her. For the first time in a long time, she felt the uncomfortable weight of being wrong. As the plane cut through the night sky, the children's resolve solidified. Whatever waited on the ground, whatever the world decided to do with the videos already spreading, they knew this much: they had stayed in their seats, they had belonged, and no one could take that from them. Night wrapped around Flight 882 like a heavy blanket. Most passengers had settled into uneasy rest, earbuds in, eyes closed, blankets pulled high. The hum of the engines was steady, almost hypnotic. Yet in row 2, Jordan and Naomi were wide awake. Their bodies sat still, but their minds ran like sprinting feet. Naomi whispered into the dimness, "Do you think Grandma will be waiting at the gate?" Jordan turned to her, his face half lit by the cabin lights. "Yeah, she'll be there. She always is." But his voice carried hesitation, not because he doubted their grandmother's love, but because tonight had shown him how quickly the ground could shift under their feet. Grace Turner walked by quietly, her shoes soft against the carpet. She stopped when she saw their open eyes. "Can't sleep?" Naomi shook her head. Jordan shrugged. Grace crouched down, lowering her voice. "When I was little, I used to stare out the window and pretend the stars were tiny lamps, guiding us. Maybe that will help." Naomi leaned toward the window, gazing at the twinkling lights scattered across the black canvas of sky. "I like that," she whispered. Grace touched her shoulder lightly. "Close your eyes and remember you're safe up here." She rose, moving on, but the warmth of her words lingered. Across the aisle, Anthony Miles shifted in his seat. He hadn't closed his eyes once since the confrontation. He was still scrolling through notifications on his phone. The video of Briggs's speech had exploded. Millions of views, major news outlets had shared it. Celebrities were retweeting with comments like, "This is leadership." Anthony's chest tightened with the realization this wasn't just a flight anymore. It was a message. Dorothy Ellis stirred beside him, adjusting her blanket. She noticed the glow of his screen. "How far has it gone?" Anthony angled the phone toward her. "Global, already." Dorothy's lips pressed together. Then maybe, just maybe, the pain of those children won't be wasted. In row 2, Veronica shifted uncomfortably. She had tried to close her eyes, but sleep evaded her. Every buzz of Anthony's phone was like a reminder that her words, her actions, were no longer private. She replayed the looks on the passengers' faces, the applause for the captain, the soft defiance in the children's eyes. Something gnawed at her, though she pushed it down with the same stubborn pride she had carried for years. The minutes stretched on, heavy and restless. Then, without warning, the intercom chimed. Captain Briggs's voice filled the cabin, calm but solemn. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I want to thank you for your patience tonight. I know it has not been an easy flight for everyone. Before we continue, I want to share something. I believe flights aren't just about distance traveled, they're about who we become along the way." Passengers stirred, lifting heads from pillows, tugging earbuds free. Briggs continued. "We began this journey with conflict. We faced turbulence, both in the air and among ourselves. But I've seen passengers stand up for dignity tonight. I've seen children show courage beyond their years. And I've seen what it means when silence breaks and voices rise together. That is the spirit that will get us safely to Houston. Not my wings, not this machine, but us." The cabin was silent, not the silence of fear, but of reverence. Jordan leaned close to Naomi, whispering, "He's talking about us again." Naomi's eyes glistened. "I know." Grace stood at the front, listening, her throat tight. Anthony lowered his phone for once, choosing to experience the words without a lens between him and the moment. Dorothy clasped her hands together, whispering, "Bless him." Veronica stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched, but something inside her cracked. She felt the weight of being the lone shadow in a cabin now filled with light. Briggs's voice softened. "We'll be landing in just over an hour. Until then, let's finish this flight as it should have been from the start together." The intercom clicked off. A murmur spread, not of unrest, but of agreement. Several passengers applauded softly, a ripple of affirmation. Jordan turned to Naomi, his voice barely audible. "We stayed." Naomi nodded, resting her head against his shoulder. And now they know. The turning point had come quietly, not with shouting, but with words that recentered the entire flight. The children no longer felt like targets of disdain. They were part of a chorus, carried by voices stronger than prejudice. Grace exhaled, her shoulders finally easing. She looked down the aisle at the faces softened by reflection, then at the twins, whose small forms seemed steadier now. This was the flight she wanted to remember, not the outburst, not the cruelty, but the moment the cabin chose dignity. As the jet cut through the night, Anthony thought about how the world would see this story in the morning, not just as a scandal, but as a mirror. Dorothy thought about the generations behind her and the gift of seeing courage bloom in children's faces. Grace thought about her vow to protect and how tonight had proven it possible, and Jordan and Naomi. They simply thought about their grandmother waiting at the gate and how they would run into her arms, not just as her grandchildren, but as proof that dignity could endure even at 30,000 feet. The first hints of dawn stretched across the horizon as Flight 882 began its descent. Through the oval windows, streaks of orange and pink broke the darkness, painting the clouds in soft fire. The cabin stirred awake, passengers shifting in their seats, gathering blankets, rubbing sleep from their eyes. But for many, sleep had never really come. Jordan pressed his forehead against the glass, watching the colors change. "Naomi," he whispered, "it's morning." She leaned over, eyes still heavy but wide with wonder. "It looks like the sky is starting over." Their words carried more weight than they realized. For them, morning wasn't just the beginning of a day, it was the beginning of what came after the storm. Grace Turner moved slowly through the aisle, checking seat belts, her tone gentle but firm. She had been awake all night, yet her voice hadn't lost its steadiness. Seat backs upright, tray tables stowed. "We'll be on the ground soon." When she reached row 2, she crouched slightly. "You two ready?" Naomi nodded quickly. Jordan hesitated, then asked in a small voice, "Do you think people will be waiting reporters or something?" Grace's eyes softened. "Maybe. The video has traveled far. But remember, you don't owe anyone your story. Your dignity speaks for itself." Anthony leaned from across the aisle. "If there are cameras, stand tall. The world should see you the way we saw you strong." Dorothy Ellis reached over, patting Naomi's hand with a tenderness that felt like a benediction. "Just remember, child, you've already written a page in history. Let the rest unfold as it may." The intercom chimed. Captain Briggs's voice, calm as ever, filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our final descent into Houston. Weather is clear. I want to thank you once again for your patience and your courage tonight. Let's land this aircraft with the same dignity we've found together." His words drew a quiet murmur of approval. The hum of the engines shifted as flaps adjusted, the pitch of descent unmistakable. Veronica Whitfield sat rigid in her seat, eyes locked forward. She hadn't spoken since the captain's public stand, but inside, the walls of her certainty had cracked. The silence of passengers, the sting of applause that wasn't hers, the glow of video she couldn't control, all of it swirled like a storm she couldn't escape. She thought of her family name, her reputation, her carefully crafted image. She thought of how quickly a necklace of pearls could become a chain. The landing gear lowered, a low rumble echoing through the cabin. Jordan gripped the armrest, Naomi clutching his hand. Grace crouched briefly beside them again. Almost there. You did so well. The tires kissed the runway with a bump, then rolled smooth. A ripple of relief passed through the cabin, followed by applause, not the usual polite clapping at the end of a flight, but something warmer, fuller, a release of the night's tension. Jordan exhaled sharply, glancing at his sister. We made it. Naomi smiled, small but real. Told you Grandma would be waiting. The plane slowed, turning toward the gate. Passengers reached for phones, bags, coats, but no one rushed to leave. There was a shared understanding they had traveled more than miles together. Grace lifted the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Houston. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off. But even before the sign blinked dark, murmurs spread. Passengers glanced out the windows and gasped. On the tarmac below, camera crews clustered near the jet bridge, microphones, tripods, satellite vans lined up like soldiers. Uniformed airline officials stood waiting, their faces tense. The story had beaten the plane to the ground. Anthony whistled under his breath. It's bigger than I thought. Dorothy adjusted her shawl, her old eyes both proud and weary. The world came to listen. Naomi squeezed Jordan's hand tighter. They're here for us. Jordan swallowed. Looks like it. Veronica's face drained of color. She muttered under her breath, This isn't happening. Grace steadied herself. She'd known it might come to this. She met the twins' eyes, speaking quietly. When we step off this plane, remember you don't have to be perfect. Just be yourselves. That's enough. The chime sounded, releasing seat belts. Passengers stood, gathering belongings, but no one moved toward the exit. They looked instead at the twins, waiting. It was as if the whole cabin had agreed silently the children would walk first. Captain Briggs appeared from the cockpit, his uniform crisp, his face calm but purposeful. He approached Jordan and Naomi. You ready to go home? Jordan hesitated. What if they ask questions we don't know how to answer? Briggs knelt slightly, his voice low. Then you say the truth you do know, that you had tickets, and you had a right to your seat. The rest is for the world to argue about, not you. Naomi nodded, her small fingers still wrapped around her rabbit. Can you walk with us? Briggs smiled faintly. I wouldn't have it any other way. The door opened. A rush of air, warmer and louder than the cabin, swept inside. Grace led the way to the jet bridge. Briggs followed with the twins, one hand resting lightly on Jordan's shoulder, the other on Naomi's. Anthony and Dorothy walked just behind, silent guardians of the moment. As they stepped onto the bridge, the noise swelled. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. What happened? How do you feel? What do you want to say? Jordan blinked against the brightness. Naomi pressed closer to Briggs. Grace lifted her hand gently, signaling to the reporters. Give them space. But one voice broke through, clear and steady, not a reporter's, but a grandmother's. Jordan, Naomi. The twins froze, then bolted forward. Elaine Cole's mother, sturdy despite her age, opened her arms wide. They collided with her, tears streaming, the kind of tears only family could release. She whispered into their hair, You're safe. You're safe. That's all that matters. The cameras caught it all. Not scandal, not confrontation, but reunion. And in that embrace, the story shifted once more. Anthony stood back, his chest swelling. Dorothy dabbed her eyes, whispering, "That's the headline right there." Briggs placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. "They'll be all right now." Grace nodded, though her throat tightened. "Yes, but the airline. That's another story." Veronica emerged last, sunglasses on, pearls still clasped around her neck, but the cameras turned toward her too. Questions sharper, unforgiving. She kept her head down, but the silence of her steps spoke louder than any words. For the twins, though, the reckoning wasn't about her. It was about the arms holding them, the crowd bearing witness, and the quiet promise that the sky might not always be hostile. They had landed, and nothing, not even prejudice 30,000 feet high, could erase that. By the time the twins were safely escorted from the terminal with their grandmother, the incident had already saturated the morning news cycle. Every major network carried footage of Captain Briggs' speech, Anthony's recording, and the reunion on the jet bridge. Social media hashtags, your flight 882, you keep your seat, flying while black trended at breakneck speed. In a high-rise downtown, executives at Horizon Air, the airline operating Flight 882, sat in a boardroom filled with glowing screens. The CEO, Alan Richter, looked exhausted. He had been awake since the first notifications pinged his phone at 3 a.m. "This is a full-blown crisis," his communications director said, sliding a tablet across the table. 24 million views and climbing. Our name is everywhere and not in the way we want. Alan rubbed his temples. "What about the crew? Briggs is a hero. Fernandez is steady. Turner, the lead flight attendant, is being praised for composure. Passengers are demanding recognition for them." Alan nodded, grim. "And the passenger, Veronica Whitfield. We've confirmed her identity. Social media already has. Her family's statement says her comments were taken out of context. It's not working." Alan leaned back, staring out at the skyline. "So, the world saw a black child told he didn't belong in first class on our airline. And the world saw our pilot, not us, deliver the response." His words hung in the room like smoke. Meanwhile, in a quieter Houston hotel suite, Captain Briggs sat across from Grace, Fernandez, Anthony, and Dorothy. Reporters had begged for interviews, but Briggs had refused. "Not yet," he told them. "This isn't about me." Grace looked weary but resolute. "They'll come after you anyway. You know that." Briggs shrugged. "Then let them. The truth doesn't change because of the camera angle." Anthony leaned forward. "But the corporate spin they'll want to make you the face of this, so they don't have to answer for the culture that allowed it." Dorothy adjusted her glasses. "He's right. They'll celebrate the captain to avoid asking why the children were targeted in the first place." Briggs's jaw tightened. "Then we don't let them. We keep the focus where it belongs, at the Cole family home." Dr. Nathaniel Cole and Elaine Cole sat at the dining table, laptops open, phones buzzing non-stop. Nathaniel, a man used to boardrooms and market volatility, had never felt so powerless. "They're showing the video again," Elaine whispered, eyes wet. "Our babies, sitting there, listening to that woman say they don't belong." Nathaniel clenched his fists. I built Coal Dynamics from the ground up. I've negotiated billion-dollar contracts, and yet my children can't sit on a plane without being questioned. Elaine touched his hand. They stayed. That's what matters. They stayed. He met her gaze, the fire in his chest flickering between rage and pride. Then we'll make sure their staying changes something. Not just for them, for every child who comes after. Back at Horizon Air headquarters, the boardroom debate intensified. We need a statement. The communications director insisted. Something strong, public apology, commitment to review. Alan Richter nodded slowly. And the children, we've invited their parents to meet privately. Offer compensation. Alan's voice hardened. This isn't about money. If we reduce it to that, we'll look like we're buying silence. Then what another executive demanded. Alan paused, then answered. We let them lead. If the Coles are willing, we invite them to help us build a new framework. Training, oversight, whatever it takes. This can't be another PR cycle. It has to be systemic. The room fell quiet. For once, an airline's future might hinge not on fuel prices or schedules, but on whether it could face its own reflection. At the same time, Anthony Miles sat with Dorothy in the hotel lobby. His phone buzzed nonstop. Interview requests piling up. CNN, ABC, even BBC. They all want sound bites. Dorothy sipped her tea calmly. What are you going to tell them? Anthony exhaled. That 2 10-year-olds taught us all a lesson about belonging. That silence protects the wrong side. And that dignity is worth defending 30,000 feet in the air. Dorothy smiled faintly. Then say it. The world is ready to hear. Grace joined them, her uniform jacket folded neatly over her arm. The airline's calling me in. They want a debrief, but I already know what I'll say. I stand by those children, and I stand by Briggs. If that costs me my job, so be it. Anthony studied her, admiration flickering in his eyes. It won't cost you your job. It'll make you the standard. That afternoon, Horizon Air released its first official statement. It condemned Veronica Whitfield's behavior, praised the actions of Captain Briggs and the crew, and pledged a comprehensive dignity and bias initiative. But the words were corporate, polished, cautious. The public wasn't satisfied. Comments flooded and words are cheap. Show us action. Put the Coles in the room. By evening, news anchors framed the incident not just as a viral story, but as a test of whether airlines could confront bias in their ranks and among passengers. And in living rooms across the country, families replayed the video, a captain standing tall, a flight attendant steady, 2 children silent but unyielding. For Horizon Air, the fallout had only begun. But for Jordan and Naomi, the message was already sealed. Their staying had not been in vain. By the next morning, the video from Flight 882 had become more than a trending clip. It was a cultural flashpoint. News anchors dissected it frame by frame. Editorials described it as a mirror of America's skies. Civil rights leaders gave interviews, praising the courage of the twins and the integrity of the crew. Even late-night comedians opened with jokes that carried a sting. Apparently, turbulence isn't the only thing to fear in first class. In Houston, Dr. Nathaniel Cole stood before a bank of microphones at a press conference hastily organized outside his company's headquarters. His suit was sharp, his posture commanding, but his voice carried the tremor of a father. My children had valid tickets. They had every right to their seats. Yet they were told, to their faces, that they did not belong. This isn't just about two 10-year-olds. This is about every person who has been made to feel like a trespasser in the space they've earned. My family will not let this moment fade into another cycle of outrage and forgetfulness. We intend to work with Horizon Air and with every airline willing to ensure dignity is not optional at 30,000 feet. Reporters shouted questions, but Nathaniel held up a hand. This is not about vengeance. It is about transformation. My children stayed in their seats. Now we must stay in this fight. The clip of his speech spread nearly as fast as the in-flight video. For many, it was the final push. This wasn't just a viral story, but the seed of a movement. Meanwhile, at Horizon Air headquarters, Alan Richter convened an emergency summit. Executives, legal advisors, and PR consultants crowded the room. "We have a choice," Alan said flatly. "We can treat this as damage control, or we can treat this as a chance to lead the industry." Grace Turner, flown in as part of the crew debrief, sat at the far end of the table. She wasn't used to boardrooms, but her voice carried weight. Damage control won't work. Passengers don't trust apologies anymore. They trust what they see. You need to show them change. Alan turned toward her. "Then tell us, what does change look like?" Grace didn't hesitate. Training that isn't just a video people click through. Accountability for passengers who harass as well as for crew who fail to act. A system where every complaint is reviewed by real people with authority to act. And protections for whistleblowers like Anthony, like Dorothy who speak up. The room shifted uncomfortably. One executive muttered, "That's expensive." Grace met his gaze. "So is losing your reputation?" Alan leaned back, considering her words. "And the coals. We bring them in," Grace said firmly. "Not as tokens, but as partners." That same afternoon, Anthony Miles and Dorothy Ellis appeared on national television, seated side by side. Anthony spoke with quiet fire. "I recorded because silence has been the enemy for too long. If two children can be told they don't belong in first class, then none of us are safe from prejudice. The time for whispered sympathy is over. It's time for action," Dorothy added, her voice carrying the slow power of lived history. "I've seen enough decades to know change only happens when we demand it. Tonight, I saw children stand, I saw a captain stand, and I say to every person watching, it's your turn." The interview trended for hours, amplifying the chorus of voices calling for reform. Civil rights groups organized petitions demanding federal oversight of airline bias incidents. Within days, lawmakers hinted at hearings. For Veronica Whitfield, the storm was merciless. Paparazzi camped outside her gated estate. Her family issued multiple statements, each more desperate than the last. Friends distanced themselves. Business partners withdrew. She became a symbol not of wealth, but of the arrogance that wealth could no longer shield. Yet the story's true center remained the twins. Jordan and Naomi appeared only once, briefly, in a carefully managed segment with their parents. Naomi clutched her rabbit. Jordan sat stiff in his chair. When asked what they wanted, Naomi's answer was simple. We just wanted to sit with everyone else. The purity of that statement pierced deeper than any speech. It echoed across networks, printed in headlines, shared in classrooms and boardrooms alike. Horizon Air responded with a bold announcement, a new initiative called Sky Dignity Protocols. Training would be mandatory, real-time bias reporting channels created, and a passenger code of conduct enforced as strictly as safety rules. Most strikingly, the airline confirmed it was forming a Dignity Council chaired jointly by Dr. Nathaniel Cole and Captain Samuel Briggs. The move stunned the industry. Some praised it as revolutionary, others scoffed, calling it corporate theater. But passengers noticed. Ticket sales, which had dipped briefly, began to rebound as the public sensed something rare: accountability. Grace Turner received a promotion Director of Passenger Well-Being, a title that hadn't even existed before. Fernandez was named to a new training committee. Briggs, though resistant, was celebrated as the conscience of Horizon Air at the Cole home. Elaine watched the announcement on television, her hand resting lightly on Nathaniel's. "Do you think it will stick?" she asked softly. Nathaniel exhaled. "If we keep pushing, yes. If we stop, it fades. That's why we can't stop." Jordan, sitting nearby, glanced up. "Dad. Yes. Son." Jordan hesitated. "Does this mean next time we fly, no one will tell us we don't belong?" Nathaniel's throat tightened. He bent down, pulling his son close. "It means if anyone tries, the world will answer back, and that's a start." The boy nodded, leaning into his father's embrace. Naomi curled against her mother's side, clutching her rabbit, her eyes heavy, but her heart lighter than it had been since boarding Flight 882. For the first time since the sky turned hostile, the Coles felt something like peace. But the world had only begun to reckon with what two children's quiet refusal had revealed. Months passed, yet the story of Flight 882 refused to fade. What might have been just another viral headline had transformed into a sustained conversation, echoed in schools, boardrooms, and even the halls of Congress. Horizon Air's Sky Dignity Protocols became a model adopted by competing airlines. Some reluctantly, others eagerly. Training programs multiplied. Flight attendant unions demanded protections, and passenger codes of conduct appeared printed on boarding passes. Bias in the skies had become not just a moral issue but an operational one. For Captain Samuel Briggs, life changed in ways he never anticipated. Invitations poured in keynote speeches, panels, awards, yet he declined most, preferring the cockpit to the podium. Still, he agreed to one a national aviation conference where he shared the stage with Dr. Nathaniel Cole, standing before thousands. Briggs spoke simply. "I didn't give that speech for applause. I gave it because two children needed to hear, in that moment, that they belonged. That is our job, to fly people safely. Yes, but also to carry their dignity from gate to gate. Anything less, and we've failed." Nathaniel followed, his voice sharp but steady. "My children did not choose to be symbols. They simply chose to stay in their seats. But because they stayed, we are all sitting here today, asking questions we should have asked long ago. That is their legacy, and ours to honor." The crowd rose in a standing ovation, not for celebrity, but for conviction, at home. Elaine Cole guided Jordan and Naomi through the aftermath of unexpected visibility. Teachers praised them. Strangers mailed letters. Some addressed to the children from Flight 882. Naomi found the attention overwhelming, often retreating into her room with her rabbit. Jordan, more outwardly steady, wrestled with questions that weighed heavier than his age. Why had they been targeted? Would it happen again? One evening, Elaine sat beside him on the porch, the Texas sun dipping low. "You're quiet," she said softly. Jordan frowned. "Everyone keeps saying we were brave. But I didn't feel brave. I was scared." Elaine brushed his hair back. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. Jordan, it's staying when fear tells you to run. You stayed. That's why the world calls it brave." Naomi joined them, clutching her rabbit. "Do we always have to be brave? Can't we just be kids?" Her mother pulled them both close. "Yes, you get to be kids. The world may remember you as something more. But in this house, you're just Jordan and Naomi. And that's enough." The twins exhaled, leaning into her arms, allowing themselves to be children again, at least for that evening. For Grace Turner, the transition from flight attendant to director of passenger well-being was both exhilarating and daunting. She built new programs, interviewed crew about bias they had witnessed, and fought to ensure that reports were taken seriously. Some colleagues resisted, dismissing it as overreach, but Grace pressed forward. In her office, she kept a small frame photo Dorothy Ellis had mailed her, the twins sitting quietly in row 2. Anthony's phone angled discreetly. On the back, Dorothy had written, "Remember why," and Grace did. Every policy she drafted, every meeting she attended. She remembered the look in Naomi's eyes when she asked, "Do you think people will be waiting?" That fragile fear was her compass. Dorothy herself became something of an unlikely celebrity. Journalists sought her out, captivated by the idea of an elderly woman who had witnessed both segregation and its echoes decades later in the sky. She spoke sparingly, but when she did, her words carried gravity. "I've lived long enough to know progress is fragile," she told a university audience. "It can be undone with a word, a law, or a silence. But I've also seen children remind us of truths we forget." Flight 882 was one of those reminders. It told us silence is no longer an option. The auditorium fell silent. Students scribbling notes, some wiping their eyes. Anthony Miles, meanwhile, leaned fully into advocacy. His recording had made him a household name, and he chose to use it. He launched an initiative called Altitude Equity, pushing for bias-free travel policies across industries. "Airplanes are just a metaphor," he said in interviews. "The real question is who gets told they don't belong, and why fix that in the skies? And maybe we learn to fix it on the ground." And what of Veronica Whitfield? Her downfall was swift and merciless. Business partnerships dissolved. Invitations vanished. Her name became shorthand for entitlement, weaponized. Months later, she issued a rare public apology, sitting stiffly in front of cameras. "I was wrong," she said, voice clipped but audible. "I let prejudice guide my actions. I hurt 2 children. I cannot undo that, but I will live with the consequences." Few accepted it, many called it performative, but some noted the rare crack in her otherwise impenetrable armor. Whether it marked true reflection or mere survival, only time would tell. For the Coles, life gradually returned to a rhythm, though never the same as before. Jordan began writing in a journal, recording not just his memories but his questions. Naomi started painting, filling canvases with skies and shades of blue and gold. On the anniversary of the flight, the family joined by Briggs, Grace, Anthony, and Dorothy gathered quietly at the Houston airport. They walked through the same concourse, now adorned with a mural unveiled by Horizon Air, a pair of children seated in first class, silhouetted against a rising sun. Beneath it, words in bold letters, "Dignity flies with us." Naomi tugged Jordan's sleeve. "That's us, isn't it?" Jordan smiled faintly. "Yeah, that's us." Briggs placed a hand on Nathaniel's shoulder. "It's more than you or me. It's everyone who chooses to stay in their seat when the world tells them to move." Nathaniel nodded, eyes wet but proud. "Then let's keep them flying." The group stood together, silent yet united, as travelers passed by, some pausing to take photos, others hurrying to their gates. Few knew the full weight of what had happened in the sky months earlier, but the mural made sure they never forgot entirely. And as the Coles walked toward their gate for a new journey, the twins felt lighter. They knew prejudice hadn't vanished. They knew the world still held storms, but they also knew they could face them not alone, but with a chorus behind them. That was the legacy of Flight 882, not just a viral video, not just a corporate reform, but a collective memory that dignity was worth defending even 30,000 feet in the air. Life often tests us in the smallest of moments: a seat on a plane, a line at the bank, a table in a restaurant. What happened to Jordan and Naomi reminds us that dignity isn't something granted by others. It is something we must hold on to, even when challenged. At just 10 years old, they taught a truth many of us learn too late sometimes. Simply staying where you rightfully are is an act of quiet courage. For those of us who have lived long enough to see cycles of injustice repeat, this story calls us not to grow weary. Prejudice may disguise itself in new forms, but the fight for respect remains the same. The pilot's decision to stand up, the passenger's choice to break their silence, and the children's refusal to move each action reminds us that we all share responsibility for the spaces we occupy. In our everyday lives, we may not face a plane full of cameras, but we will face moments that ask, will we protect another's dignity, or let silence speak for us? The lesson is simple: dignity endures when ordinary people choose to act. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and walking through this powerful story. If it touched your heart, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to our channel. Together, we can keep telling stories that inspire change and remind us of the dignity we all deserve.